Hey guys, how you doing today? Here showing you how to replace the valve cover gaskets on a 2001 Mitsubishi Diamante. This is the V6 3.5 liter engine, in case you couldn't tell that it says that right on the motor. This will be the first time I'm doing this on this particular car, so you'll have to bear with me. There may be steps that I do not show very clearly, or I might take off things that somebody who knows how to do these, I might take stuff off that shouldn't have been taken off. But whatever the case may be, this is the 6G74 engine. I believe this body style is from 95 through 2004, I think. I think they gave a little bit of an updated version maybe in 2000 or so, but regardless, this is the V6, and we will have to take this intake manifold off in order to get to the back set of valve covers. The front one here doesn't look too hard to get at, as with most V6s. As anyone will tell you, working on front wheel drive V6s is the worst thing to work on. I personally don't like doing it, but I got to do this anyway. So right now I'm going to focus on getting this whole airbox assembly off, the air tube. I'm not going to tell you what tools you'll need specifically, just a good set of hand tools, a Phillips screwdriver, a flathead screwdriver, probably a set of needle nose pliers, and that should be all you really need to get this off. So first thing I'm going to tackle is removing this here air snorkel intake. It's held on by these little push pins down here at the bottom. You can just use a Phillips screwdriver to remove them. There should be three. This one here is missing, but there are two here. I'm going to go ahead and just unscrew them and then just lift them up out of there, and you should be able to remove. Well, don't set your drill there, but you should be able to remove these by just loosening these up and then going ahead and pulling them out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. After you got that out, you can go, after you get the screws out, you can go ahead and just pull that off just like this and set it down to the side. Now we'll be focusing on taking out the airbox. Yeah, we can go ahead and just loosen up the clips here like so. Go ahead and pull the air filter out entirely and just set it down to the side. This here particular box is held on by 10mm screws. You can go on ahead and get a 10mm socket and an extension. There is in total, there's one screw right here on the front of the airbox that's right behind the battery. You'll see it in plain sight. And then if you look directly behind this here lid, right straight down right here, there's another 10mm that's holding on this front piece. And then you'll need to look right inside of this here lid. You'll see also another 10mm that's holding on the box. Again, you probably don't need to remove this, but I'm going to remove it because I like extra space. So there's also a couple of washers on there, so be careful, make sure you don't lose them. And this thing should just come out like so. Okay, so now the next thing we would be trying to tackle is removing this airbox lid that's over here. This entire piece here that runs up to the throttle body. So go ahead and disconnect the mass airflow sensor. You just push down on the tab and wiggle it off. You got to be careful when you're taking off wire connectors, especially for older vehicles, because they are really old by now and they're brittle, so they could break easily. So make sure you take your time so that you don't break the connectors by accident. Okay, so now it would appear that we could none of these other connectors are really holding onto this thing, so we'll just loosen up this one 10mm. There's a 10mm bolt see if I can get you guys. There's a 10mm bolt that's right here. Go ahead and loosen that up, and you should be able to wiggle this whole entire assembly out. Just like so. You can go ahead and disconnect this. There's a little breather hose that's right here attached into the airbox. You can see it right here. You go ahead and just pull that out. You might have to wiggle it a little bit, but it'll come off. Okay, just like so. So now that that is off, go ahead and just set the whole airbox assembly down on the ground. You probably want to take a picture of all of these vacuum hoses and whatnot to make sure you know where they go, so that you don't get them all mixed up later on, because you are going to be taking them off. That's what I'm going to be doing now. Grab yourself a pair of pliers and a flathead screwdriver to help you maneuver some of these off, because they probably will be stuck. So I'm going to go ahead, all these right here that are coming towards the engine, I'm just going to remove them now from the motor. So the one here from the looks like for the EGR vacuum modulator. Go ahead and just remove them all. All the hoses that are attached right here. These you can just set them to the side, as you'll get back to them later when you're done. Okay. Now the next thing we can do is disconnect the ground right here off the firewall, 10mm. You can just leave this hanging. You can go on ahead and loosen up this other 10mm right here. It's a clamp that's holding this vacuum line here that you will also need to remove and take off. This can just set throttle cable, because you will need to disconnect the throttle cable. Now you'll see where the throttle cable comes through on the other side over here. If you push the cable through, you can push it through enough to where that you can slide the you'll push it through enough to where you can take the actual small piece of the throttle cable off, and you should be able to fish it back through the other side. So now the throttle cable is off. That is held on by two 12mm bolts right here. You can go ahead and disconnect both these and just set the throttle cable off to the side. Something tells me that these two bolts hold down part of the intake manifold, so don't put them back in, just leave them out. Then you can just set the throttle cable off to the side. Make sure it's out of your way. Okay, so the next thing we will need to do is to remove this here plastic cover that's on top of the motor. It is held on by a few 10mm, looks like, bolts. Then you can go ahead and lift this up and take it off of the motor. And that would have unleashed, at least this valve cover you can do pretty easily. But first I think I'm going to tackle the back portion, because that's a little bit harder to do. You can see someone got a zip tie in here holding this connector on. Things like this you have to follow and make sure that you don't mess with them. The next thing it looks like we're going to need to do is to pretty much remove this whole entire throttle body assembly that we have here, so that we can take the intake manifold off. What I'm going to do is try to leave this as intact as possible, so that way I don't disturb any of the vacuum lines or any of the connectors. All I'm going to try to do is to remove the two bolts that, or excuse me, There's either two or no, there's 4 bolts that hold the throttle body to the actual intake. They're here 1, 2, 3, and 4. You'll see the main 12mm bolts that are all around. I'm gonna just try and remove those so that way all of this can just stay intact. I am gonna remove this here small little brownish color piece from the manifold so that it can just stay here. I will put this screw back in here so I remember where it went. You can go ahead and disconnect this big connector right here and put the screw back into place so you don't forget it. Be careful when you're moving these wiring harnesses. Like I said, they're very old and very brittle. And you can also go on ahead and disconnect this manifold pressure sensor up here. I believe you need to stick a flathead screwdriver right into the bottom of the metal retaining ring, and then you can go ahead and take it off. Or conversely, if you don't want to mess with that connector at all, you can just take 8mm screws right here and unbolt it and just lift it off and hang it down to the side, which is probably what I'm going to do. And you can just lift this right on out of its place. Okay, let's move on to the other side. We'll tackle that throttle body in a minute. Over here on this side, there are various connectors that are intact. As I said, it's best not to touch anything if you don't have to. On the side though, there are connectors, and they're all, if you notice, they're all held on with 10mm bolts that are holding them onto a bracket. So it's easier for you to just loosen the 10mm bolts and just leave all the connectors connected, so that way you don't have to mess with any of the wiring. So that's what I'm going to do. There's a 10 that's right here that's holding on 2 connectors. And you'll see what I mean here. These 2 connectors I now just have loose here. So you can stick the bolt back into place where it was at. Again, I apologize if I'm not zooming up on everything, but you should be able to know what I'm talking about, where I'm at. And then this particular bracket is also held on by 2 10mm, one right here and then one on the side. The one that's in the bottom might be a little bit difficult to get to. You might be able to get at it, you might not be able to get at it. In the case of that, I'm just going to disconnect these connectors on this particular one. And then we'll just leave it at that. There are 2 vacuum hoses that come in. You can go ahead and just pull them both off, and you can leave them like that, it's fine. And then that will allow you to get to the very back connector over here. You need to actually remove it from the bracket. You could just loosen up the 10. Excuse me, I need to get a ratchet. The very back connector, you will have to actually take off the 10 to loosen it off the bracket so that it's not attached anymore. And you will need to do the same thing with the other 10mm here. You can go ahead and loosen and remove it completely. Careful not to drop these bolts down into the engine. The connector, see, you just take them off. Same for the other one. Get in here with the 10, loosen it up, and then just take it off completely. You can put the screws back into where they go, that way you don't forget where they go. Okay, so mostly on this side everything is pretty disconnected. Okay, after you got these connectors right here taken off, you move to the back of the manifold where there are there's a pipe that comes up from the exhaust manifold or the header that's held on by 2 12mm bolts. You need to take those bolts out and pull the pipe away from the intake manifold. Be careful because there's a gasket that is in there. A little gasket looks like this. Don't let it drop down. You need to hold on to that. So you can go ahead and pretty much just take those 2 out. There's also 2 black brackets in the back of the manifold. One is right here on the end. The other one is about right here. They're both held on by 12mm bolts. You need to loosen and take those off. There is a small 10mm bolt that's right behind this circle here with the map sensor that you took off. loosen up the 10mm, just move the vacuum hoses to the side. You'll see it go straight to the EGR valve. You will want to unplug that from the EGR valve. Just take that vacuum hose off. And then there's also one more vacuum hose, these two vacuum hoses. One goes into the intake manifold itself, and this one plugs into the EGR valve. So you can go ahead and just loosen both those up and just set them to the side. The EGR valve, I think you can leave it attached to the manifold. Don't quote me on that, I'm not sure yet. I will know once I get that far. I'm gonna leave it attached for now. And now I'm just gonna work on getting the throttle body off so that we can move all that to the side and continue on. Oh, there is one bigger hose that's on the back of the manifold also. You need a pair of pliers or whatnot to take the clamp off. It goes to the brake booster. So I'm gonna go ahead and get a different set of pliers and take that off. You can go ahead and wiggle this off or maneuver it off however you can. It might be on there pretty tight. Now I'm gonna go ahead and move around to the throttle body side, see if we can get those bolts off. Okay, now that we're gonna move to the throttle body side here with all of this mess, trying our best not to have to touch any of that or mess with any of that. If you look closely at the throttle body, there are 4 12mm bolts, 2 on the top here, 2 on the bottom, that are holding on the throttle body. We're gonna try our best to, I'm just gonna loosen those 4 up and try and just move this whole entire assembly this way, so that way I don't have to actually disconnect all of this vacuum nonsense just to get this manifold off. So there are 4 of them. I'm gonna try and take them off now. Okay, so it looks like there's one 12mm bolt that is, I'm sorry I can't show it to you on camera, but if you look at this here, this round circle thing up here, right all the way on the bottom below the throttle springs here, there's a 12mm bolt that's holding on this entire assembly. You can probably get behind it with a ratchet on the back side, which is what I'm going to do, and then you should be able to have this whole assembly be free to come towards you. This is the bolt from the bottom. Now this whole assembly should be able to move. As you see, it moves freely. You don't need to pull it very far away, just pull it away just enough to where you can see it will be very clear of the intake manifold, which it is. All of these other vacuum hoses, you looks like you will need to, you can take off these two main big hoses up here. I know I said to leave them on earlier, but go ahead and slip them off of one side. Probably take them both off of this side right here. Or it actually doesn't matter which way you take them off, but you will need to remove them because they are attached, or they'll be in the way when you go to move the manifold off. Oh no, actually it will be good. As long as you can fish these little tiny hoses, these small ones that go around to the back, as long as you can fish them through this big hose, then you should be okay. Pretty much need to have all the small hoses over here on one side, and these big hoses can just stay attached. It's fine. Okay, so that should have everything free now that we can focus on removing this stuff that's up here on the front of the motor. Okay, now that we've got the throttle body off, we can go ahead and move to the front of the motor here. As you can see, like I told you, someone was already here messing with this connector or whatever this is right here. I'm not going to touch this here. It is held on by, you'll see in the back here, there are 3 12mm bolts. These are also holding down part of the intake manifold. So loosen those 3 up. This here bracket should be able to move down this way out of the way. Make sure you don't forget the position in which these went in. As you see that loosen this here bracket, just be careful that you don't move these wires too much. You can probably hear the brittle cracking of the wires, so I don't want to move these too much. So now all of this should be out of the way for now. And now the only bolts I believe that are holding on the manifold are, there should be in total 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We've already taken off these 2 earlier. These 3 you just took off now. Took off now. And there's one here on the end, a 12mm nut. And there's also one here on the end, a 12mm nut. So we're gonna go ahead and loosen those up and see if the intake manifold is loose. There will be a gasket under there, so be careful you don't lose it or damage it, because you probably can reuse it. And then you also have to be careful because on the back of the motor, if you remember, we did not take off the EGR valve, so I do not know where that is connected to. There's a washer that's right underneath that. It's a lock washer, so don't lose that either. Okay, so now that you got those loose, you can go ahead and come over here and try and pick up the manifold a little bit. As you can see, it should be very loose already. You should be able to lift it just straight up off of where it is, and you kind of have to maneuver it around. As you can see there, the EGR valve is good to leave on. There are 2 vacuum hoses that you need to take off. This large one that's on top, and there's a small one that's on the bottom. So I'm going ahead and loosen those up now and take those off. Now you should be free to lift up the manifold and remove it from the car. Okay, now we'll have access, as you can see, to both the valve covers so that you can get to the gaskets. It looks like the gasket stayed in place here. I'm just going to leave it there. Now pretty much all we need to do is focus on taking off the spark plug. You can take off the spark plug wires. Do remember where they go. This is also a good time to change your spark plugs and the spark plug wires if you need to. I'm not going to show you how to do that. That could be for a different video. But you will need to just lift up the spark plug wires, just pull them straight up and just set them all down to the side. This first one is a bit tight to pull up, so you're gonna have to follow back the wires where it came from so that you can loosen it up. Okay, so after you got all the spark plug wires pulled out, obviously the front 3 and the back 3, the 2 shorter ones you probably notice are really difficult. I actually broke this one right here because I was not being very smart, so I'm gonna have to go buy a new set of spark plug wires. But after you get all of them out, you'll notice that there will be breather hoses, one right here on the front. The PCV valve, you can just pull it out, set it to the side. There also will be another vacuum hose that sits on the top of the back one back here. You can just lift that hose off. This is what that hose looks like. Then there will also be, I believe, no more on the back here that I can see. There's one right here in the front also that you'll need to loosen and take. Well, it would appear that this one right here is actually connected to the other valve cover as well, with the hose clamp on the other side. So you'll have to do your best to try and get, this one is connected here, the other one is connected right here on the side of the, on the side. You may be able to get away with just taking out one and then just fishing this vacuum hose through to the other side. That's probably what I'm gonna try to do. So we go ahead and take off this front valve cover. It's just held on by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 10mm bolts. Be careful that you don't lose these bolts. Okay, now that you got those all loose, you should be able to wiggle this up here you'll want to go on ahead and clean off the surfaces of where you're going to put the new gasket at, and also remove the old gasket from here, and then you can go on ahead and reinstall the new gasket on this side, on the front side, and reinstall it back on, and then you can go on ahead and move to the back side. Okay, so by now you should have installed the new valve cover gaskets in the valve cover. You would install the new tube seals that go underneath the spark plugs. I would like to note that the correct valve cover torque for this is 30 inch-pounds. Don't go beyond that, because you probably will strip the screws out, because they are just small with fine threads, and it's going into aluminum. So and make sure that you want to get the correct torque, which would be 30 inch-pounds. So we're ready to put the intake manifold back on. Pretty much just put it right back on top, and you can bolt the two nuts on the ends right now, and then we'll worry about the other ones in a little bit. Make sure that everything is out of your way before you set it down. Just like so. It should set pretty much right back down where you had it, and then you can go on ahead and install the two nuts that go on the ends first. Don't forget to put the lock washers in place. I'm going to go ahead and tighten up these two nuts right now that are on the end. Okay, those are back in place now. Now you can go on ahead and reinstall the three 12mm bolts that go right here, and that helps you hold on this bracket right here. And then there's one that holds on this bracket as well. Now we're pretty much just trying to button up everything that we've taken off. We'll go on ahead and reinstall this here, 10mm to this connector right here. Like so. Need to make sure that we remember where the vacuum lines went. This big one goes right here onto this nipple right here, and just slide it back into place. If you remember, these slid underneath this big one to go around to the back of the motor, or excuse me, the back of the intake manifold. Just feed them through there so they can, you know, sit however they were before. You can just let them hang right now for now. There was a little tiny nipple right here on the bottom, right in front of the throttle body. There's a tiny little nipple right there where a little hose, or excuse me, vacuum hose went on. So we'll go ahead and reinstall that one back to where it was at. Everything throttle body wise looks okay. This connector was up here on top of the motor. It can be a maze to get this stuff off. This little one right here went attached to this guy here and the front, like so. This went around the front of the throttle body like that, and it bolted into place, but we'll get there in a minute. You can go on ahead and reinstall the 12mm bolts that held on the two black brackets in the back of the intake manifold. You can go on ahead and install that small pipe that came from the exhaust with the two bolts also. You can go on ahead and reinstall those back into place. Don't forget to put the gasket back in place. Remember this little small gasket here that was on the back? Don't forget, that might be a little difficult or challenging to get it where it needs to line up at, but we shall get it on there. Okay, you can go on ahead and re-bolt down these two vacuum hoses. The small one that's attached to the metal bracket goes to the EGR valve, and the other one just gets attached to the small nipple that comes straight out the back of the manifold. Okay, after you got the small vacuum hoses hooked up on the back for the EGR and the little nipple, you can go ahead and reconnect the largest one in the back for the brake booster. Just reconnect it back where it goes, and then put the hose clamp back into place. Okay, now that you've got the brake booster hose on, you can go ahead and reinstall all of these connectors that were over here on the side. The largest one that takes two 10 millimeters. You'll have two vacuum hoses that go into it. The shorter hose will go onto the bottom port, and then there's a hose that has like a gray cylinder on it that goes to the top port. So we'll go on ahead and get these reinstalled in place. Don't forget that some of these bolts will hold two brackets. Like this one over here will be on the farthest left side. It also gets attached to the 10 millimeter that's on here. So you just have to take your time to get everything sorted on there correctly. These can all be a little bit difficult to try and get back exactly how you had them, but that's why I said to take a picture in the beginning, then you'll get it back at least close to where it was at, if not right on. And tighten these all up. Okay, all this is back together over here. Now we can go on ahead and move over to where the throttle body was at so we can get that back reconnected where it was at. Okay, moving into the throttle body now, getting it back on. It's easiest to do the top bolts first because you can kind of hold the throttle body away and see where the bolt hole is. Don't forget to stick the bolts through this bracket here on top. Both top bolts need to go through that one for both of them. And you go on ahead and start the top ones by hand. You can go on ahead and tighten these ones up all the way by hand. That way the bottom bolts should be lined up where they need to be at. Okay, then you go on ahead and once you get all four of them started by hand, you go ahead and tighten them all up. Okay, those are all tightened up now, ready to go. Okay, this little guy that's hanging right here, he goes bolted straight back up on top of the motor up. Remember, these are 8 millimeter bolts that are holding this little map sensor on. It just should pop down into place. Okay, now you need to reinstall that 12 millimeter bolt that's up underneath the bottom of the throttle body here. And we had to reach around to kind of feel where it was at to get it started into place. So remember, you can go ahead and reinstall this small little guy right here into the 10 that goes right here. Okay, got that into place. Now I believe we have these vacuum hoses that you tucked up to the side earlier. They will need to get reinstalled back to where they went. Okay, got the throttle body on, this little brown piece on. Now you remember you tucked all these here hoses off to the side in the beginning. You can connect these after you put on the airbox or the intake arm if you want, but I was already here, so I just went on ahead and connected. I did leave one undone so that way I can get the airbox on easier. This one actually goes down and connects to the vacuum modulator here for the EGR. I'm gonna leave that disconnected. The large hose went to this here, and the smaller one, you'll find you have to kind of pull it up there to meet where it was at. That's where that goes. But I'm gonna leave this one off for now. Right now I'm gonna focus on putting the throttle cable back on. So as you remember, that routed around the engine, and it sits with the two 12 millimeters right in the middle of the motor on top of the intake manifold. Took these two these two long bolts. So you can go ahead and bolt that back into place where it goes. Make sure you get both of them on. Here, let me get you a view over there. You can bolt both of the two bolts that go right in there. You can go on ahead and install those and tighten those up so that they are snug. Then the next thing you'll want to do is to reconnect the throttle cable. You remember you had to, don't connect anything to the bracket just yet. We'll get there in a minute. If you remember, you have to feed the throttle cable, open the throttle up some with your finger, just push on it, and then you can feed the cable through the bottom. You'll feed it in through the bottom of the bracket here, and then you can go on ahead and reinstall it back onto the throttle pulley. If you also remember, you set down a vacuum line over here. You threw it over here to the side. I don't know if you can see that in the camera or not. There's a vacuum line that came from the passenger side of the engine. That goes right here on top to this vacuum little nipple right here. So go ahead and slide that on. And then you'll put this bracket here on top like this for the throttle. And then you'll also mount the vacuum hose into one of the holes, into the front hole. And then you'll mount this ground as well to this bracket right here with two 10mm bolts. The ground, stick the bolt through the ground and also into the bracket as well. And then you can tighten both of those up. Like so. So pretty much we're getting there now. We're almost about done. The only thing you want to do now is to reinstall the airbox. Oops. Reinstall the airbox back onto the car. It's just held on obviously with the 10mm bolt for the clamp. So I'm going to go on ahead and grab the airbox now. And then obviously, we got to put the engine cover back on the front. This will just slide straight on. Yes, it will. It'll just slide straight on over. It slides into two clips right here in the back. And then you can go on ahead and line up the bolt holes and bolt this with the 10mm back into place as well. So now I will go ahead and grab the airbox and stick that on. Don't forget that the mass airflow sensor connector is under here. It needs to go under the intake. So don't forget that. This just pops back into place here. You might have to maneuver a little bit. And if you remember, there's a small little nip, this little hose right here. It goes right attached to the nipple that's coming off of the intake. Then you can go ahead and tighten up the 10mm that's holding on the intake tube. Like so. Then you can reconnect that small vacuum hose that I left off initially. You can reconnect that to the top of the EGR modulator. And we're all good there. You can reconnect the mass airflow sensor connector. Then you can go ahead and slide the airbox back into place. Don't forget that there's that one 10mm that's sitting inside the airbox. You can go ahead and bolt down this airbox with the one bolt that's on the outside here and the other bolt that bolts up here on this side. This part of the airbox here slides into two notches that you'll see in the bottom of this part. And then you can go on ahead and just slide the air filter straight back down into position. The two notches on the airbox face forward, like so. And you can go on ahead and clamp it back into place, like that. Okay, so pretty much everything is back together. We do have that small little triangular airbox snorkel piece to go on, but just double check all your connections, make sure everything is tight, and I guess I'll show you how to put the small little air box back on so you know how to do that. Pretty much just slide straight back into place just like it was, and you slide it up under this plastic piece here in the front. Might be kind of hard to do that. And then you use the little plastic pins that you took out to hold it in place. And that's everything back together. And so that's pretty much how you would do the valve cover gaskets on this car. It is very time consuming. This will probably take you about 3 hours, maybe 3.5 hours to do. Because by all means, it's not a rush, especially on these older cars. You want to be careful with all the vacuum lines. So there are challenges that you might have to go through to get this done. By all means, it's easier to do valve cover gaskets on newer cars because everything is still new and pliable, so it's not as brittle and it won't break very easily. But nonetheless, that's how you do it. If you have any comments or questions, leave them in the comment section below. If this is your first time to the channel and you're watching this video and you liked it, please hit the like button, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button on the way out. I really appreciate you guys watching my video. I will see you guys later.